Good afternoon or good evening, depending on what time zone you're joining us from. Welcome to The Open Mind, a lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders at the intersection of science and culture for meaningful and relevant discussions about mental health issues. These programs are proudly sponsored by UCLA's Friends of the Smalley Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors. I'm Vicki Goodman, and I'm excited and honored to welcome today's featured speakers, Dr. Sue Smalley and Diana Winston, authors of the critically acclaimed book, Fully Present, The Science, Art, and Practice of Mindfulness, an all-in-one guide for anyone interested in bringing mindfulness to their daily life as a means of enhancing well-being. Originally written in 2011, this second edition, released in January 2023, includes a 20-page afterword with an update to the science and a discussion of what has happened in the field in the last decade. Now, a little about each of these esteemed and extraordinary women. Dr. Sue Smalley is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at UCLA. She is a behavioral geneticist, investor, activist, and writer. Dr. Smalley spent over 3 decades conducting genetic research on behavioral disorders, including autism and ADHD, as well as research on mindfulness and wellness. She published 100+ peer-reviewed articles on genetic influences in human behavior and has written extensively on happiness and well-being for online journals. Post-retirement from UCLA, Dr. Smalley moved from academics to business, co-founding PTK Capital, an investment fund focused on early-stage companies that are likely to benefit the human condition. She recently helped create the Badari Kindness Institute at UCLA to bring more kindness into society, something we really need, through the integration of science with social impact work. She serves as the chair of the executive committee of that institute and as an emeritus board member of Equality Now, a global human rights organization dedicated to women and girls. Diana Winston is the Director of Mindfulness Education at UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center and author of the Little Book of Being, Practices and Guidance for Uncovering Your Natural Awareness. Called by the Los Angeles Times one of the nation's best-known teachers of mindfulness, she has taught mindfulness since 1999 in a variety of settings, including hospitals, universities, corporations, nonprofits, and schools in the US and Asia. A sought-after speaker, she developed the evidence-based mindful awareness practices curriculum and the training in mindfulness facilitation, which trains mindfulness teachers worldwide. She is a founding member of the International Mindfulness Teachers Association. Now, just before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. Today's program will run for approximately 1 hour, with the last segment reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask either of our speakers a question, we ask that you please type it into the Q&A located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have more than 1,700 people registered for today's program, so we thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. Today's program is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel, which you can find on our website, friendsofthesmalleyinstitute.org. There you will find information about some of our programs, including the Friends Research Scholar Program and our Teen Advisory Council, a library of videos from past Open Mind programs, and a calendar of upcoming events. We have a very important reminder that the virtual Open Mind Film Festival will be held on Sunday, April 30th at 2 p.m. Pacific Time. Registration is now open for this event that highlights the amazing works of high school filmmakers who have joined the conversation about mental health. To watch the program, please register on the Friends website and encourage your friends and family to tune in as well. And also, WOW 2023, the Mental Health Summit on May 4th at Royce Hall with special guest Oprah Winfrey. We hope you will join us for all of these exciting and informative programs. And now, please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Dr. Sue Smalley and Diana Winston. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki, and it's such an honor to be part of this series. I'm Diana, and I'm going to start us off with just a few minutes of mindfulness and experience. So even if you've never done it before, we're going to see what it's like to practice just a little bit of mindfulness meditation. So I just invite you to get comfortable, and if you want to close your eyes, you can. You don't have to. You can be looking downward so you're not too distracted. Just wherever you're sitting is fine. Being comfortable. Notice if your feet are on the floor. You can feel the touch of your feet against the floor. Notice your body seated here. Let's take a few deeper, slower breaths. Inviting yourself into the present moment, right here and now. You can notice what's happening in your body. There might be heaviness, lightness, warmth, coolness, comfort, discomfort. Just to notice what's here. And if you find any areas of tension, you can relax them a little bit. Just by breathing a little deeper, softening your stomach area, softening your shoulders, hands, face, and facial muscles. Just letting yourself be for a moment. All of the busyness of the day is not present right here. Notice how you're feeling as we begin this event. Maybe you're excited, curious, open, skeptical, happy. See if you can notice what you're feeling and let whatever is here be here. And taking one more breath, notice this present moment, body, mind, emotions. Feel your feet on the ground. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes or end the meditation. I was giving you a taste of mindfulness, which is really the essence of our book. And if you're unfamiliar with the concept of mindfulness, mindfulness is paying attention to our present moment experiences with openness and curiosity and a willingness to be with that experience. So it's just what we were doing. We were just sort of showing up for ourselves. What's here? Oh, you didn't have to be a certain way. You didn't have to be excited. You could have been sort of curious. What's happening? But we're paying attention. We're using our attention skills to notice what's happening in this moment. And what we learn to do as we develop mindfulness, for those of you who are interested, is you learn that as you pay attention to the present moment, you get lost in all sorts of thoughts because we're constantly getting pulled out of the present moment. And mindfulness is this invitation to keep coming back. And you can train as a skill set of learning to be mindful, usually through meditation. And then it begins to permeate your life, and you can practice it in the midst of your day. So that's the core of the book. And the book itself, Sue and I collaborated on, as Vicki mentioned, we wrote it in 2011 and then had this recent update, which we did. And I have been personally practicing mindfulness at this point for over 30 years. I started practicing when I was straight out of college, and I was living in Asia and practicing in monasteries there and retreat centers and doing a lot of deep dive, mostly in the sort of Buddhist lineage. And at a certain point, after practicing for many years, and at that point, mindfulness wasn't well known. It's a lot more known these days than it was back then. But I was trained to teach, and I started teaching. But I soon got very clear that these practices were something that anybody could benefit from. People, no matter what their background, you didn't have to do it within a religious context, but you could do it in a way that was just the simplicity of learning to be in this present moment, and how incredibly beneficial it could be for a whole host of issues, such as cultivating mental wellness, right? There's so much, and Sue's going to share with you the research about it because it's so interesting. So once I kind of moved in that direction, I encountered Sue, and she was starting up the Mindful Awareness Research Center, which is a center we've now had for over 17 years at UCLA in Semel. And it's been this opportunity. When Sue and I met, we just knew we shared the same vision. And I've been teaching classes and events, and we have a whole program of things that's been going on. I'll share that at the very end. For many years, teaching thousands of people about mindfulness. At some point, we decided that we wanted to have a book, and that book would bring together both the science and the practice. So the science is so key to what's made mindfulness more well-known in the culture, more accepted, because of all the work the researchers have done. But the science alone wasn't going to be enough. We need to have the practice piece, the art of mindfulness, and that's my end, because I'm the educator and Sue's the scientist that we've been working together and did for many years. So we're going to go into the science, and then we'll do a little bit more practice, and then be open to your questions later on.
Thanks, Diana, and hello, everybody. So a little bit about how I got into mindfulness, because it was different than Diana's story. So I was a UCLA professor for 35 years, as you heard earlier. But in about 2002, I was pretty cynical about anything like meditation and yoga. I was very much, I would say, a hardcore scientist studying the genetics of childhood psychiatric conditions, trying to find genes that contribute to human behavior. And I didn't really have time for anything that seemed new age to me at the time. But at the other hand, I was an incredibly busy professor, and I had 3 kids, and felt like many career people today, very overwhelmed. And at the time, social media wasn't even present. I had piles of papers on my desk. So it was a different world back then. And I think it's just we know it's gotten more and more, more and more avenues for information, but not a lot of insight into how to handle all that information, So I was a stressed out mother and working professor, and I had an early stage melanoma that just knocked me off my balance, knocked me out of balance, because suddenly I was facing this cancer diagnosis and a really fear of my own mortality. And when that happened, it was like I suddenly woke up that I wasn't in control of everything. And so I took a short medical step back from UCLA for a moment and started to look at how could I try to help myself prevent the cancer from coming back, and also just stay healthy. So I had done a traditional Western approach to everything and didn't believe in anything alternative at the time. So I dove into alternative medicine. I started using supplements, acupuncture, et cetera. And I read that one of the things that was helpful is to change your habits. So I quit wearing a watch. I drove different routes to work. I used a different burner on the stove. I couldn't believe how habitual my patterns were. As I was looking at outside habits, I started to meditate. And all of a sudden I was trying meditation. Now I had a mantra because I'd gone to college in the 70s, and a lot of people got mantras because the Beatles came back from India and they were doing meditation. So it kind of spread across a lot of college campuses. I had had this mantra, a word that I would say, and I started meditating every day. Took a yoga class, became macrobiotic, was doing a lot of behavioral change. And after about a month of really intensive meditation, I had a shift in consciousness that was inexplicable. I had no words for, other than I felt completely interdependent and interconnected with the universe. I couldn't muster feelings of envy, greed, hatred, any of those feelings that I had quite a few of it hidden quite well in my life had disappeared. And I was just in a blissful state of joy and happiness. At the same time, I was just very fully present. Everything, I wasn't thinking about the future. I wasn't thinking about the past. I was just in really an altered state of consciousness. And it was so beautiful that as I started coming back to knowing I had to go back to work and what was I going to do, I realized I had found this authentic happiness that was very different than what I had been looking for using genetics, brain imaging, etc. I had discovered it by a simple practice that, as Diana said, is very old practice. So I took a sabbatical and I dove into the science of what there was about the science of meditation, because that was the language I understood, science, to try to understand what happened to me. And I studied philosophy and psychology and the great religions and poetry, trying to really understand using different words what had happened and how I had found this very pure, authentic happiness and a sense of well-being that I had never experienced so profoundly. Anyway, that was 2002. We started the Mark Center in 2004. And through the course of this, it became really clear to me that I had fallen into this one side of a coin, one side being using the lens of reason to look at the world, to use science only. I was cynical of anything that didn't allow scientific investigation. And there was another way of knowing. It was an intuitive knowing. It could be stimulated by a lot of different practices, but a really valuable one for me was meditation. So mindfulness became very important. And that's why we built the center and wrote the book, to try to bring those two lenses together. So I'm just going to give you kind of an overview of what we know about the science that we incorporated in the book in a short, like little science slide presentation. So hang on, I'll bring it up. Okay. So the science of mindfulness. When we finished the book, there's been now at least 5 times the number of studies that we were able to look at the time we wrote the book. There's over 17,000 studies on mindfulness, and 2/3 of them have happened since 2014. We hired a wonderful researcher to help us look at everything, Dr. Winnie Liang, and she really could help tackle that 17,000 papers. But the bottom line is 10, 12 years later, our findings are consistent with exactly what we said at the time. Mindfulness shows beneficial effects. So the interesting thing about it is that I'll go back to this. The interesting thing is there are 17,000 studies on mindfulness, but if you look at something like exercise and heart disease, you'll find there's over 80,000 studies. So the field of mindfulness is still relatively small. And that's why I think we still haven't seen it become so mainstream. You're going to hear it's much more mainstream than it was 10 years ago, but it still isn't something that everyone has tried or everyone is interested in. And I think when you start to look at the science and more publications come out over the next decade, it's going to be the same as exercise. there's going to be a need for these kind of practices in our lives. But those 17,000 papers span a whole bunch of topics: mindfulness and health, mindfulness and brain. And I'll just touch on a couple topics. So brain. The brain is really interesting, especially from a science perspective, because we know how valuable it is in everything we do, think, feel, etc. And there's lots of ways of looking at the brain. These just show examples of an EEG, where you're looking at electrical signals on the outside, or an MRI scanner, and you can look at the brain structurally, or you can look at it as what it's doing in real time, functionally. Some of the early reports that got people very interested in meditation were these studies looking at the brains of long-term meditators, often monks or nuns or people that have spent lifetimes meditating, and comparing them with the brains of non-meditators. And they measured in very detailed fashion segments of the brain to see if there were any size differences in the cortex, in the cortical thickening. And they did find clear-cut differences. And on the right, you'll see that box with a 1. That was the insula cortex, a part of the brain that's important for mapping what's happening outside of your body to the inside body states. And that seemed to show very striking differences in longtime meditators versus not. Well, since we published our book, there have been many more studies. That region shows up as showing size differences, structural differences, but so do a lot of other regions. And it's intriguing. It's not saying the whole brain is different, but there are certain regions that are different. Now, you might think, though, well, maybe people that have brains like this become monks, become nuns, become longtime contemplative practitioners. There was a study in 2011 that tried to get at that by looking at people that didn't know how to meditate, putting them in a scanner, having them meditate, learn how to meditate and do it for 8 weeks, on average about 30 minutes a day, and then measuring their brains again at the end. And they found that they were finding structural differences in parts of the brain that are involved in different functions: attention, learning, memory, much on self-referencing, kind of figuring out who you are, telling a story of who you are, and the stress response. So it doesn't appear that it's just those kind of brains that go in, but that just short practices can have a change in the brain. An interesting study that came out since we published the book is now using functional MRI. So you're actively looking at the activity of the brain while someone's meditating. And as Diana said, often you start with some sort of focused attention. It might be on the breath or a word or your body or sound, but you focus attention and then your mind wanders. We all know what that feels like. Mind wandering happens a lot. You notice the mind wanders, and then you bring it back to paying attention. That's the basic principle behind most types of meditation practice. So these researchers studied the brain in meditators while they were meditating and asked them to just hit a button when they noticed that their mind was wandering. By doing that, they were able to then study which parts of the brain were active, and they mapped exactly in the regions of the brain that we know are important for attention, for mind wandering, for noticing, and then for shifting back. So it's really exciting to see the level of detail we're able to get understanding what's happening in the brain with meditation. But the brain's just one part of the body. And as I mentioned at the beginning, mindfulness impacts a lot of systems. The other area that's gotten a lot of work in the last 10 years is what happens to the immune response. It was first brought up by John Kabat-Zinn that in a study that he was doing on psoriasis, that maybe healing rates would be different if you gave mindfulness versus treatment without it. And that they did fine. They used UV light in both cases, but they added mindfulness, and the psoriasis cleared up in both cases, UV alone or UV with mindfulness, but the mindfulness one happened faster. So that's kind of triggered a lot of interest in the immune response and also the inflammatory system. The studies of the last couple of years, you can see in the slide, they're exactly in the opposite direction of stress. So we know that the cortisol goes up, inflammatory response goes up when you're under stress. Meditation has the counter effect. The same with the immune response going down with stress. Meditation has the opposite effect. And then my area, which was genetics, this I think surprised a lot of people, including me. Investigators started asking, well, if it can impact all these body systems, what's it doing at the genetic level? And many of you have heard about telomeres. Telomeres are the tips of the chromosomes, which are your DNA tightly packed in every cell. And the tip of the chromosome is called a telomere. It's, by analogy, like a shoelace tip. The plastic tip makes it easy to thread the lace through a shoe. And the same when you have long telomeres, cells replicate really well and DNA does what it's supposed to do. With aging, telomeres start to shorten. Just like a shoelace tip frays with age, our tips of our chromosomes shrink with age. So investigators started to look at, could mindfulness counter that effect? And the studies, a few studies are starting to suggest, yes, it can. The other way genetics has been looked at is by looking at gene expression. So all your cells carry the same amount of DNA information, but you know your liver cell produces quite different products than a heart cell, and that's different than a brain cell. So what accounts for those differences is the whole field of epigenomics, and that is factors that turn up and turn down gene expression. Mindfulness and meditation have been looked at. Do they impact gene expression? And this study, these bright green and red dots, just are a way of looking at gene expression in different groups of people. And the groups of people, I just want you to look at the purple bar at the top on the right of that colorful chart and pretend you just drew a box straight. Those are meditators. The people under the N and N1, just think of them as pretty inexperienced non-meditators. You can see that there's a big difference between the red color and the green color in that far right box or far right group of people. That indicates that there are genes that are turned up and genes that are turned down. These happen to be genes involved in inflammation, in the inflammatory system, and DNA repair. And this is just as a function of meditation. So all that research is starting to show us clearly that while we knew the body can impact the mind, we never really thought the mind had that big of an effect on the body. So what are the mind states that get affected by mindfulness? I'm going to just mention attention, emotion, thoughts, and relationships. So attention. All of us, there are lots of different types of attention. One is just how awake you are right now, how alert, where you're putting your attention. Are you looking at your phone? Are you listening to me? And this kind called conflict attention, it's the kind you need to get something done because you start a task, you get in, something distracts you, and you have a hard time going back. That's called conflict. I'm going to give you a task to try for a minute so you can see how we measure it in the laboratory. So for the following words, you're going to see a bunch of words. Name the color of the ink they're printed in and ignore the word. You're at your home, just say them out loud. So most of you probably noticed it's not that easy. You have to ignore reading. You have to inhibit an automatic response. And since most of you are over 8 and reading is very automatic now, you're going to read much quicker than your ability to notice the color of the word. So you have to inhibit reading to pay attention. Well, when you're meditating, often they'll say, focus on your breath. Well, you don't have to watch your breath for you to breathe. So that's, it's not automatic to watch your breath. The automatic thing is for your mind to wander away and start daydreaming or planning or doing something. This mind wandering is big, and it takes a lot of effort to inhibit mind wandering and pay attention to what you're doing, focusing your attention. And as you see, you practice it, your mind goes away and you come back. So you can train conflict attention, and the research shows that people do improve in conflict attention pretty quickly. Well, how often are we actually paying attention to what we're doing? We're trying to help you practice, put a practice into your life so you pay attention more to what you're doing. But it's so interesting to see how often we do it. And this study came out after our book. Researchers used smartphones and tapped 200 people on lots of times throughout the day and collected all this information about what are you doing? Are you paying attention? And what's your happiness level? And as you can see, when they collected all that data and put it together, we are fully present with what we're doing about half the time. The other half of the time, and that's that big light blue bubble, the other half of the time, we mind wander. And we mind wander into 3 buckets: pleasant thoughts, happy thoughts, neutral thoughts, grocery lists, etc., and unpleasant thoughts. Now, when you look at the happiness, how happy you are, you're the happiest when you're thinking pleasant thoughts or you're fully present. Those neutral and unpleasant take you into less happy territory. The problem is most of the time when you mind wander, you're not in the little pleasant bubble. You're out there in unpleasant and neutral 2/3 of the time. So I always tell people, this is one, if you feel bad, just bring yourself to the present moment, because the likelihood you're going to feel better if you just do that. But anyway, you see your mind wanders a lot. And there's nothing wrong with mind wandering. In fact, we know it plays a role in helping us know who we are, have a narrative about ourselves. But it's when you get trapped in being in that space more and too much that it can lead to anxiety or depression or stress. And so much of the research in mindfulness has been focused on stress reduction, anxiety disorders, mood, and depression. And the research over the last decade has just, again, 5 times the number of studies, much better studies, better design studies. And the data really support that mindfulness-based interventions, particularly things like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, work as well as traditional psychotherapeutic interventions and medication. Now, some people respond better than others. Wave of research is trying to help identify who responds best to which practice and what kind of treatment. And as I mentioned, though, the most consistent finding across studies is people feel better. They feel happier. And again, why this study came out 2 years ago, and it really started to ask the question, what happens with meditation over time? How do you relate to the world? And one of the things that's coming out is there's a shift in the way you relate to yourself. Instead of the world through a very self-focused lens, you start to create a much more space or greater tolerance for the way other people see things, understanding, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. You have a greater tolerance for uncertainty. There's more openness, more emotional security. There's brain changes in this mind wandering network. It's not just mind wandering, but it's called the default mode network. And that's probably related to the shifting view in self as well. More self-compassion arises, and then more kindness to others. And that's where I think I'm most excited. You heard about the Kindness Institute as well at UCLA. We're really moving into science of kindness now and trying to understand, how does mindfulness play in that space? What else can impact kindness? So there's some really interesting studies that have come out since our book came out, looking at direct impact of mindfulness on kindness. this is a study out of Northeastern University. And in the study, they have people invited in to be part of a research project. You're given a clipboard with paperwork you have to fill out, and you're sent to a small room. In that room are 2 chairs. One chair is empty. You sit down. You start filling out your paperwork. There's someone else sitting in the other chair. As you're filling out your paperwork, in walks someone on crutches. They lean against the wall. They sigh in pain. There's no place to sit down. Well, do you give up your chair and offer it to the person with the crutches? If the other person doesn't get up, and they never get up because that's part of the research project, they sit there. We only see people give their chair then like 14% of the time. But if they've just had a simple mindfulness course or exercise prior, they 3 times offer their chair. So it's a direct measurement of the impact of mindfulness on kindness. And there's other studies like this that have looked at its impact on gratitude, et cetera. And I think in the end, we're just seeing how mindfulness to increase compassion and care and empathy and openness. And that leads to kinder actions. That leads you to becoming more aware of your actions. That leads to more mindfulness. So it's a cycle that moves us toward a kinder world. So I'll end there and turn it back to Diana, who's going to talk more about that.
Thanks, Sue. It's great to hear you talk and just let people know that the level of clarity that Sue brings to talking about the science of mindfulness is really infused throughout the book. And it's really special to be able to, for me, to have learned from her for so many years. It's really great. I'll just say a few things and then maybe we'll do a practice. First of all, some people, I was looking a little bit at the questions and we'll have time for that in a bit, but one of the questions is what's the difference between meditation and mindfulness? And so meditation is a big category. Like you can think of meditation like sports. It's a huge category. There's so many kinds of sports, hundreds and hundreds of sports. And then meditation is the same thing. It's a big category. Many types of meditation fall under that. And so maybe some of you have done transcendental meditation or some kind of guided visualization or a moving meditation. There's lots. Mindfulness is the type that focuses on awareness. And that's the practice that we've been researching and teaching over these years. And it's something that's available really for anyone who's interested to practice. And I typically start people off with just 5 minutes a day. Everybody has 5 minutes, doesn't matter what's going on in our lives, we can usually spare 5 minutes. And as people do it and they work up to it, they start to notice a change in their lives. And that's what's interesting. These things that Sue is pointing to become, you start to see it reflected back. Less anxiety, less depression, a little more present with your kids. Your partner says, wow, you handled that so calmly. I didn't expect that. These are sort of the signs of learning how mindfulness can impact our lives. And just to say, when we did the updated edition, the practice of mindfulness did not change. So as Sue said, Sue got to look at all the new research, which very much supported what we had said 10 years ago. The practice didn't change. What did change was the field changed. So going back to the concept of meditation, there was a 2017 study that told us that meditation had become $1 billion industry. Not mindfulness, but meditation itself. And this is kind of extraordinary because, as I mentioned, when I started meditating in the late 80s, it was pretty fringe. People didn't, it wasn't taught, it wasn't talked about. You had to kind of search it and find teachers in different, like I was traveling, living in Asia. Now mindfulness has become, and meditation is this huge industry. Mindfulness has become embedded in school curriculums. We're seeing it brought into the corporate sphere. We're seeing it brought into healthcare, medicine. It's brought into mental health significantly, as Sue was saying, incorporated into clinical treatments. Mindfulness is being taught with children, with older adults, with people. Like there's just a huge range that people have found to incorporate mindfulness. And that's been like this incredible surprise and wonderful thing for me to see, that over these years mindfulness has grown. And it's not a panacea, it's not going to solve all your problems, I promise you that, but it can improve our lives in different ways for those who's interested in it. And it's not for everyone. Mindfulness, some people really respond to it, and others, it may not be for them. Mindfulness, there's now apps, right? Well, of course there wasn't apps 20, 30 years ago, but the amount of mindfulness apps just kind of blows my mind. There's like the way that all these people have made these practices available and accessible, which then of course causes the issue of how do we make decisions? How do we make choices? How do we know who to trust? And that takes some time. There's certainly like different apps that are more well known, that are considered trustworthy, and people are familiar with apps like Headspace and Calm. UCLA, we have an app called the UCLA Mindful app, and if you're interested, it's a way that you can practice mindfulness. You can do a 5-minute meditation. You can try it daily. So I'm going to take just like 2 or 3 minutes to do just another short meditation, and then we'll open this up to your questions. So once again, just inviting you back into just going inside, and eyes open or closed as you wish. And taking a breath or two to allow your body to settle and to come more fully into this present moment. You might notice that your body is breathing. There's a rising and falling of your abdomen or chest, where the air is moving through your nose, tingling, warmth, coolness. See if you can tune into your breathing. Just get curious. What's happening? Oh, rising, falling, expanding, contracting. And as you notice this simple, not easy to do, but simple thing to notice, you might find your attention wanders. So just bring it back to the rising, falling. In, out. And if there's sounds, we can just turn our attention to the sounds in the room or outside the room. For a moment, listening to the sounds coming and going. So you can stay with the sounds, you can stay with the breath. When your attention wanders from either of them, come back. Just bring it back. No judgment. Yeah, this is what minds do. It's totally normal to have a wandering, distracted mind. When you notice you're distracted, then come right back to the breath, body, sound. And as Sue mentioned, kindness. There's lots of practices within the mindfulness world where we cultivate kindness. Just take another minute or two to bring kindness to mind. And to do that, think of somebody you care about, someone you love, admire. This could be a best friend or a child or family member, teacher. Have them come to mind, sense them, imagine And as you think of them, just think of the qualities you love about them or what you admire or appreciate in this person. And you can also use an animal. So dog or cat is also quite useful here. Bringing to mind, recalling the qualities you love about this person or animal. And notice how it makes you feel inside. You might feel warmth or expansive or a smile to your lips. It's kindness, the desire for this person or animal to be happy. You can just say some words, whatever words you want to say. Usually we say words like, may you be happy and peaceful. May you be healthy and strong. May you be safe and protected. May you be at ease. So as you say these words, or say whatever words you want to say to this person, animal, and once again, notice how that feels to contemplate them kindly. And if you're feeling kindness right now, really let that spread through your body. Enjoy it. And if you're not, because sometimes with this practice, that's not what happens, and that's okay, you can say, for whatever I'm feeling right now, can I hold this too with awareness? Can I hold this with awareness and with kindness? And let's feel our feet touching the ground. And then when you're ready, open your eyes if they're closed, or end the meditation. Okay, well, thanks for that practice with me, and I think we're going to open it up. Right?
Thank you, Sue and Diana, for sharing your vast knowledge and expertise on the art and science and practice of mindfulness to enhance our physical and mental well-being. I know, Diana, every time I do one of your exercises, I feel my entire body relax. And it's just such a peaceful feeling. So thank you for that. And thank you for helping bring kindness to our minds, something that is so important and seems to be lacking from our society. So thank you for that. And we're going to open it up to questions now. First question is from Robin for Diana. Do you teach mindfulness to stressed out teens? I'm going to add teens with ADHD or a lot of anxiety or all the things our teens are suffering from right now.
Yeah, so we have done many programs for teens over the years at Mark. I actually wrote a book for teens called, it was in Buddhist, called Wide Awake, a Buddhist Guide for Teens. And we are associated with an organization that I highly recommend if you are interested in teen mindfulness, called IBME, Inward Bound Mindfulness Education.com, IBME.com. But yes, teens can learn. We tend to focus more on adults through our center at UCLA, but we do have classes from time to time for young people. And we also do 4-credit classes at UCLA. So older teens, college, otherwise known as college students, can attend our programs.
Wonderful, thank you. Question from Jeanette. It is so interesting that meditation can cause changes in the brain. Do you have any studies or data on the benefits of meditation and the brain, specifically in relation to autism or someone with autism?
Um, I don't think so. Were groups that are studying it, but I don't know that there's been any evidence yet that it's going to. I don't think it would not be helpful, but I don't think we have large studies yet to answer in what way is it helpful. But I would anticipate, having worked in autism and worked in ADHD, and we did quite a bit of mindfulness work in ADHD. I would be surprised if there's not some benefit, because in autism there can be, obsessive compulsive kind of behaviors too. And we know that these practices are really beneficial for that. But I haven't seen specifically studies saying, in autism per se. They may exist, but we haven't seen them published.
Question from Jay, just identified as Jay. How long should you meditate or be mindful, as we did in the beginning of the lecture? What is an ideal time? And I know, Diana, you mentioned you start people with just a few minutes, but ideally, what would be best practices?
Yeah, the most important amount of time is how much, what you're going to do, right? So that's why I start people kind of with 5 minutes, but people tend to work themselves up to about 15 to 20 minutes, but it's really what's going to fit into your life. And also, when do you start to feel an impact? 5 minutes, maybe people meditate for 5 minutes and okay, I'm noticing I'm calmer, I'm more at ease. So just keep going with that. It's not a one size fits all. And I do recommend every day, because it's like any kind of practice. The more you do it, the more your skills improve. Just like if you were learning to play tennis or something, by doing it, you get more skills. Yeah.
I also add to that, it's a cumulative effect. So often these, groups will be grouped by 5,000 hours of practice over a long period of time. So I think, what Diana's saying, if you're getting 15 minutes in every day, or some people like to do twice a day, it adds up over time. And so 2 things, you're getting a practice that is consistent, and then cumulative, you're getting more time.
I'm going to throw in one more thing. You can also practice mindfulness throughout the day without doing it as a meditation. So you might do it as you might pick an activity and you can remember to brush your teeth mindfully, or you're about to yell at your kid and you take a mindful breath and you pause, or before you send an email, or you can always bring, once you understand the tool of it, you can then bring it into your life throughout the day.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Diana's book specifically addresses that. How do you do it in a natural way throughout the day? For me, I think that's the most important thing, and we don't talk about that quite as much as we talk about a practice. So a more formal practice.
Thank you. And that's something we can all incorporate into our lives. Warren asks, and is there an entity that offers meditation and mindfulness in West LA? And Diana, this is a great place to talk about Mark.
There is. It's called Mark, the Mindful Awareness Research Center, which is our center at UCLA. We're now very much online, of course, these days, and we're global, but we offer events, programs, and classes. There's all sorts of ways you can learn mindfulness. So one of the things I do, and well, along with some other teachers, but every Thursday at 12:30 at the Hammer Museum, we have a mindfulness meditation, usually led by me, sometimes other people. And that's one of our live events that we're doing right now. It's free. You can come any Thursday. And then if you're interested in diving more deeply into mindfulness, we're offering classes, some live in person and some online. Our classes are called MAPS, Mindful Awareness Practices classes. And then we offer a whole host of programs. I'm going to be doing a day in May 11th on cultivating loving kindness. So if you're interested in that kindness practice, we're going to spend a whole day, not meditating, don't worry, you're not going to meditate for 8 hours, but little bits of meditation and learning about this cultivation of kindness that's so core to mindfulness. That's coming up. So you'll get information about Mark through after the end of the program.
Thank you, Diana. Rick is asking, how can you use mindfulness to change a mindset to reduce stress, or to just use mindfulness to reduce stress?
Well, I mean, it really, if you just start, you're going to find you're going to be less stressed. So that's where the science is really promising. There's so many studies that illustrate just practicing 20 minutes a day over an 8-week period, people have reported much less stress, and biological markers drop down too, consistent with you being less stressed. So we know it has a pretty quick impact on the stress system, but it also gives you tools for being able to handle stressful situations better, sort of building resiliency with practice. And then you're better armed when more difficult things happen in your life. One of the things to bear in mind, it's a practice like a piano playing. And it's good to practice when you're feeling less stressed. Don't start the practice when you're in the most hyper-stressed state ever. Try to find where you're not so stressed to practice to learn what it is. And then it will even help you when you're feeling more stressed. Now, sometimes you can't do that. So I say just practice anytime. But hopefully you even noticed in the 3 minutes of Diane's guided practice, like we heard, you can feel better pretty quickly. You can feel less stress pretty fast if you just bring your attention to the present. So I think it's try it, and the science supports it.
Thank you. Question from Leo. Have there been any studies on mindfulness or meditation for people with OCD? He goes on to say that he has mindfulness has been more approachable for me than he would have expected, but at the same time, OCD always makes frequent appearances.
Well,
I like the way that was phrased.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, I have certain anxiety things. They don't all go away with practice, that your personality change with practice. You still have characteristics. We all are unique. We all have different cognitive styles, et cetera. I think it can be really, really beneficial in treating OCD. And Jeff Schwartz, who's a professor at UCLA, wrote a book. I think it's called The 4-Step. His name is Jeffrey Schwartz, specifically on a 4-step mindfulness type practice program for OCD. And there are other research projects, not a lot, but there's enough to suggest that it can be beneficial. What I always say is, hopefully you have a psychiatrist or someone you work with, because mindfulness and mindfulness-based approaches can be beneficial. But if you have a diagnosis, if you're on medication, you ought to consult with your psychiatrist to talk about that. Talk about, don't just go off meds and try mindfulness. Try mindfulness and then discuss what you're seeing, how it's working, et cetera, with a healthcare professional.
Question for Marion. What if following the breath causes anxiety and or more irregularities and stress?
Yeah, that's an important question. So it's important. It's helpful when you're doing mindfulness to focus on something, at least to get started. And a lot of people focus on their breathing, but you don't have to focus on your breathing. You want something that is neutral. So if for some people, when they focus on their breath, it could produce anxiety. So you can do something else. That's why I offered you the sounds. You can listen to the sounds as they come and go, or you can pay attention to the sensations in your hands or feet, for example. So something that is easy to return to, that's neutral, you don't like it too much or dislike it, that can be a good source of learning how to be present. And it is really important, as one of the things that in the mindfulness field as it's developed is that there's lots of options for people. So when we think of a trauma-informed mindfulness, because mindfulness can impact people, and some people can have when, for instance, if you're teaching people with a trauma background, we want to give lots and lots of options when they practice. And that part of the field is really developing and has developed in the last 10 years quite a bit.
Thank you. Aviva is actually talking about asking if you can use musical sounds, which is what you just brought up in your practice of mindfulness. And she's asking can the sounds be changing, or should it always be the same sound?
Was she asking about music or sound?
Musical sounds.
Musical sounds. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different types of meditation. Remember, I said it's like hundreds and hundreds of types, but that is a beautiful way to meditate, is to listen to sounds. What tends to happen with music, like with music, if you listen to it as a meditation, it's often easy to kind of get caught in sort of memories and visions, and you kind of get out of the present moment. But some music, especially more meditative music, can help you get more into the present moment. So it's about finding something that's really going to help you be more present if you're aiming for that.
Thank you. I am afraid we're out of time, but there were a few questions about apps and books. And I know Sue mentioned Jeffrey Schwartz's book. And Diana, you spoke about your class at the Hammer Museum on Thursdays, which I would highly recommend. For people who might not be able to get to the class, are there any apps that you would recommend? I know there are many, many out there, but are there any that you think would be a great place for someone to start?
Okay, so also just to say about the Hammer Museum, it's live streamed, so you can just do it. You can do it in your own home as well. I'm very biased, so I'm going to start you off with the UCLA Mindful app. What's nice about our app, aside from being free, it's an educational app supported by UCLA, which is really wonderful. It has lots of short meditations, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, some videos on how to get started, and then new meditations every week. And also it has meditations in 17 different languages. So that's kind of really also changes in the field that I've seen in 10 years. Beyond ours, some of the ones that people like are Headspace, Calm, 10% Happier. Those are some of the sort of more classical ones that people go towards in the beginning.
I think we should stick with your app.
Okay.
And on that note, thank you again, both of you. This has been very informative and inspiring presentation. And you've given us so many things to think about and unpack into our daily lives. So thank you. And thank you, everyone, for the privilege of your time. We look forward to seeing you for the Open Mind Film Festival. Come on Sunday. It's virtual, April 30th at 2 p.m. The films that these students have made are really incredible, and I hope that you'll all tune in. And of course, we have WOW 2023 on May 4th, Royce Hall with Oprah. Lisa Kudrow is the host. Many good things to look forward to. So thank you again, and have a good evening. Have a kind and peaceful evening.
Thank you.